They called Elara Grayson the beige ghost of the Upper East Side. While her billionaire husband, Richard, tore through New York society, she was the quiet, dowdy shadow trailing behind him. His mistress, a flashy influencer named Amelia, saw Elara as a joke, a relic to be mocked over brunch. But they forgot one thing. Ghosts have secrets. And at the biggest party of the year, in front of the world's press, they were about to find out that Elara wasn't a ghost. She was the one holding the hammer, and she was about to bring the whole house down. Elara Hayes Grayson was a creature of beige, not the warm beige of a sun-kissed beach, but the sterile, unassuming beige of a doctor's waiting room. Her life, from the outside, seemed to be curated in that single, forgettable shade. She lived in a 20,000-square-foot limestone penthouse overlooking Central Park, but she occupied it the way a hermit crab occupies a shell it found, not one it built. Her uniform consisted of Brunello Cucinelli cashmere cardigans, sensible Todd's loafers, and pearl earrings, the kind her grandmother had worn. Her husband, Richard Grayson, was the opposite. He was a creature of chrome, glass, and booming sound. Richard was a new money titan, a private equity shark who had built a $14 billion empire, Grayson Capital, seemingly from nothing. He was loud, charismatic, and pathologically obsessed with his public image. He was on the cover of Forbes, the subject of fawning profiles in the Wall Street Journal, and the man every gala in New York clambered to have as their guest of honor. He had married Elara Hayes 10 years ago. Back then, he was just a hungry junior partner at a small firm. She was the quiet, intellectual daughter of the Hayes family. Old money, so old it had stopped trying to impress anyone in the 1920s. The Hayes fortune was deep, quiet, and tied up in land, art, and impenetrable trusts. Richard saw Elara as his key. She was his access to a world that would never have acknowledged him otherwise, and for 10 years she had been the perfect, unobtrusive accessory, the beige wife. Lately, however, the accessory had been tarnished, or rather, displaced. Amelia Vance was the displacement. She was everything Elara was not, loud, synthetic, and aggressively visible. A 24-year-old influencer with 30 million followers, Amelia was a walking neon sign of Richard's midlife crisis. She wore Balmain so tight it looked painted on, carried Birkin bags in crocodile and neon pink, and documented every lavish gift Richard bestowed upon her. Richard wasn't even subtle. He was, in fact, proud. He saw Amelia as another acquisition, a testament to his power. He saw Elara, with her quiet reading and her pointless charity board meetings, as a piece of legacy furniture he was required to maintain. This particular Tuesday morning, the tension in the penthouse was thick enough to cut. The Grayson Foundation annual gala was in 3 days. It was the apex of the New York social calendar, held this year in the Temple of Denda at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was, in Richard's mind, his coronation. "Elara, for God's sake!" he boomed, striding into the breakfast nook. He was already in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, smelling of expensive cologne. Elara was nursing a cup of tea, reading a thick, leather-bound book. She looked up, her expression placid. "Good morning, Richard. I just got off the phone with my PR team." He ripped a piece of croissant in half, his movements agitated. "They're asking about your dress for the gala. Please tell me you're not wearing that grey thing you wore to the opera last month." "It was charcoal," she said softly, "and it was a classic Lanvin. It was a shroud, Elara. A shroud. This is the Met. We have the Vogue team confirmed. We have reporters from Bloomberg. I need you to look like the wife of a billionaire, not a provincial librarian. Can you please just call Amelia's stylist? She can get you something. impactful. The mention of her name was a deliberate, casual cruelty. Ilara's fingers tightened on her teacup, just slightly. Amelia's stylist, she repeated, her voice perfectly even. Yes, look at her. He gestured impatiently to his phone, which was always open to Amelia's Instagram feed. She knows how to make an entrance. She looks like money. You look comfortable. I see. Ilara closed her book. I will make sure my attire is appropriate for the evening, Richard. You needn't worry. That's what you always say. He scoffed, grabbing his briefcase. And then you show up looking like my accountant. Just try, Ilara. Try to look like you're married to me. He was out the door before she could reply. Ilara sat in the silence for a full minute. The beige of her cardigan seemed to absorb the light in the room. Then she picked up her own phone. She didn't call a stylist. She called a number listed in her contacts under a single initial, T. Marcus Thorne speaking, a crisp, professional voice answered. Marcus, Ilara said, her voice dropping, losing its placid, wifely tone, and replaced by something cold and sharp as steel. He just confirmed the Vogue team. The timeline is accelerating. I want the final audit on my desk by 4 o'clock. And notify the Journal. Tell them the source is confirmed and the story is greenlit. Time to pull the trigger. And the gala? Marcus asked. A small, dangerous smile touched Ilara's lips. Oh, the gala is still the main event. Tell our friends at the SEC their invitations are at the door. And call Paris. Tell Valerius. It's time. The official start of the gala's festivities was a small, exclusive donor luncheon held 2 days before the main event. It was hosted at Balthazar, the iconic Soho Brasserie. The restaurant hummed with the sound of old money chatter and new money deals. This was not a place for the press. It was a closed-door gathering of the city's 50 most powerful philanthropists, the real whales, whose checks kept museums and hospitals running. Ilara arrived alone. She wore a pleated fawn-coloured skirt by Loro Piana and a cream-coloured silk blouse. Her only jewellery was her simple gold wedding band and the small pearl earrings. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant chignon. She was, as always, immaculate, understated, and utterly invisible. She blended into the polished wood and warm lighting of the restaurant. Richard was already there, holding court at the central table, and, in a breathtaking breach of protocol, Amelia Vance was seated next to him. The room, filled with people like the Astors, the Vanderbilts, and new titans of tech, registered Amelia's presence with a collective, subtle tightening of expressions. She didn't belong. This wasn't a party for influencers, it was a meeting of principles. Amelia, of course, was oblivious. She was dressed in a fire-engine red, skin-tight Balmain mini-dress, emblazoned with enormous gold buttons. A massive, diamond-encrusted serpentine necklace, a recent gift from Richard, was coiled around her throat. She looked less like a guest, and more like an extremely expensive party favor. As Ilara approached, a hush fell over the immediate area. Richard, seeing her, had the decency to look momentarily flustered. Ilara, you made it. Richard. She inclined her head, her gaze calm. She did not look at Amelia. Amelia, however, was looking at her. Her eyes, expertly lined, raked over Ilara's outfit with blatant dismissive contempt. Oh my God, Amelia whispered, just loud enough for the entire table to hear. She leaned into Richard, her voice a theatrical stage whisper. Richie, darling, is she serious? Richard's face flushed. Amelia, stop it. No, I am. What is that? A teacher's uniform? Amelia giggled, a high, tinkling sound that grated on the nerves. Ilara, sweetie, she said, finally addressing her directly, her tone dripping with false pity. "I didn't realize they were letting the staff sit with the guests." Ilara stopped. She turned her head slowly to look at Amelia. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade. "I'm sorry?" Ilara asked, her voice quiet but carrying. "Your clothes," Amelia said, emboldened by Ilara's lack of an immediate angry reaction. She waved a hand, laden with diamond rings, at Ilara's outfit. "That beige thing. My grandmother wouldn't even garden in that. Richie, you really have to give your wife a better clothing allowance. It's embarrassing for you." The table was frozen. A few of the older matriarchs looked utterly appalled at the audacity. This wasn't just rudeness, it was a social declaration of war. Ilara looked at Richard. This was his moment. His wife had just been publicly, viciously insulted by his mistress in front of his most important peers. Richard shuffled in his seat. He saw the expectant, cold stares of the other donors. He saw Amelia, pouting and defiant. He saw Ilara, waiting. He was trapped, and like a coward, he chose the path of least resistance. He let out a short, forced laugh. "Amelia, you're terrible," he said, giving her arm a light squeeze. He then turned to Ilara. "Ilara, you know how she is. Just, come on, sit down. Let's have some wine." He hadn't defended her. He had, in effect, sided with the mistress. He had tacitly agreed with the assessment. "You are embarrassing me." Ilara's expression didn't change, but inside, the last, thin thread of sentiment that she might have held for the man she once loved snapped. The steel in her spine solidified into titanium. "No, thank you, Richard," she said. Her voice was clear, crisp, and cut through the silence. "I find I've suddenly lost my appetite." She looked at Amelia. It was the first time she had truly looked at the younger woman. It wasn't a look of anger or jealousy. It was a look of assessment, like a scientist observing a particularly simple, brightly colored microbe under a microscope. "That's a very loud dress, Miss Vance," Ilara said, her voice dangerously smooth. "It's always interesting to see what people choose to wear when they are so desperate for a seat at the table. They often forget that the price tag is not the same thing as the cost." Amelia's smile faltered, confused by the cryptic insult. Ilara then turned back to Richard. "Enjoy your lunch, Richard." She turned and walked out of Balthazar. She did not hurry. Her footsteps were silent on the tiled floor. Every eye followed her. The beige ghost had just left the building, and the temperature in the room had dropped by 20 degrees. Richard Grayson was left to stammer and bluster, his power at the table utterly shattered. He had been made to look weak, cruel, and foolish by both his mistress and his wife. Ilara did not go home to the penthouse. She did not go to a spa or to her mother's townhouse to cry. Her chauffeured car, a discreet black Audi A8, not the flashy Rolls-Royce Richard preferred, glided through Midtown and stopped in front of a glass and steel skyscraper. She entered a private lobby, bypassing security with a simple nod, and took an elevator to the 54th floor. The doors opened onto a space that was the antithesis of her public persona. This was the headquarters of the Hayes family office, the nerve center of her ancestral fortune. It was not a dusty, wood-paneled relic. It was a hyper-modern war room, floor-to-ceiling glass, a central command table with holographic data projections, and a silent, focused team of analysts, lawyers, and forensic accountants. Marcus Thorne, her family's chief counsel, was waiting for her. He was a tall, severe man in a Savile Row suit. "Ilara," he said, his tone one of deep respect. "You're early." "Richard brought Ms. Vance to the donor luncheon," Ilara said, stripping off her beige cardigan and hanging it on a coat rack. Underneath, She was wearing a sharp, sleeveless silk shell. She was no longer the wife. She was the CEO. Marcus raised a single disapproving eyebrow. A tactical error on his part. It was a catalyst, Ilara corrected, walking to the head of the table. A young analyst immediately brought her a tablet. Where are we on Grayson Capital? He's been sloppy, the analyst, a woman named Sarah, replied. He got arrogant. He's been using the Grayson Foundation, your foundation, I should add, as his personal piggy bank. He's leveraging its assets to cover high-risk derivatives in his personal fund. And the shell companies? We've pierced them, Marcus said. All 7. He's been diverting foundation funds to purchase assets, a condo in Miami, a McLaren P1, a significant amount of jewelry from Graf. Amelia's gifts, Ilara stated. It wasn't a question. Precisely, Marcus confirmed. He's not just an adulterer, Ilara. He's an embezzler. He's been stealing from his own charity. Your charity. Ilara looked at the data scrolling across the screen. The numbers were staggering. Richard hadn't just built his $14 billion empire. He had inflated it, illegally and immorally, using the bedrock of the Hayes endowment she had gifted him in trust when they married. He thought her old money was stupid and passive. He had mistaken her patience for ignorance. When we married, Ilara said, her voice distant. My father warned me. He said, men who are desperate for money will never understand people who have it. Richard doesn't see this as a foundation. He sees it as a vault, and he's been robbing it blind. He's vulnerable, Marcus said. The minute this goes public, his credit lines will vaporize. Grayson Capital is a house of cards. His $14 billion valuation is based on assets he doesn't, technically, own. They're leveraged against your trust. Good. Ilara's gaze was hard. The gala is tomorrow night. The Wall Street Journal runs the story at 8 p.m. The SEC investigators will arrive at 8:15 p.m. The board of the foundation will receive an emergency packet at 8:20 p.m., along with my motion to remove Richard as chairman and install myself as interim head, effective immediately. It's an execution, Sarah, the analyst, murmured, looking awed. It's a correction, Ilara said. He built his name on my money and my family's reputation. He's about to learn what it means to lose both. She turned to Marcus. And the other matter? Marcus smiled for the first time. It has arrived. It's in the secure room. He led her to a large, climate-controlled vault at the back of the office. In the center of the room, on a velvet-draped mannequin, was a dress. But dress was the wrong word. It was a piece of architecture. It was a masterpiece. It was the final piece from Valerius, the enigmatic, reclusive Parisian couturier who had not taken a new client in over a decade. He was a legend, designing only for royals and generational icons. Getting a Valerius was harder than getting a private audience with the Pope. For the Hayes family, however, he was an old friend. The gown was made of a material that seemed to drink the light in the room. It was a deep, impossible sapphire blue, like the heart of a glacier. The structure was severe and majestic, a sharp, sculpted bodice that flared into a dramatic, floor-sweeping skirt. It wasn't adorned with sequins or feathers. Its power was in its cut, its form, its sheer, undeniable presence. And the accessories, Marcus said, gesturing to a smaller case. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, was the Hayes necklace. It was a river of ice-white, heirloom diamonds, culminating in the legendary Hayes Star, a flawless 100-carat blue diamond. It had not been seen in public since Ilara's great-grandmother wore it to the coronation of King George VI. Amelia Vance, in her borrowed Graf diamonds, was a child playing dress-up, This was power. "He wanted me to look like the wife of a billionaire," Ilara said, touching the cold surface of the diamond. "He's about to be reminded what the wife of a founder looks like." She would not arrive as Ilara Grayson, the beige wife. She would arrive as Ilara Hayes, the woman who owned the board, the bank, and the man who had just humiliated her. The couture wasn't just a dress. It was her armor. It was her weapon. It was her declaration of victory. The Great Hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a sea of glittering opulence. The ancient Egyptian temple of Dendar, illuminated by dramatic blue and gold lighting, served as a majestic, silent witness to the spectacle. This was the night Richard Grayson had been planning for a year. It was his ascent, the moment he transitioned from new money shark to old money philanthropist. He arrived on the red carpet at 7:30 p.m. sharp, stepping out of a cherry-red Bugatti. The flashbulbs erupted into a blinding epileptic strobe, and on his arm was Amelia Vance. If her luncheon outfit was a statement, this was a proclamation. She was wearing a custom-designed gown by a notoriously flashy designer, one known more for spectacle than taste. It was almost entirely sheer, a spiderweb of Swarovski crystals and nude mesh that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. It was, by any standard, scandalously inappropriate for a charity gala at the Met, but it was, undeniably, an entrance. Richard, who are you wearing? Amelia, you look incredible. Give us a twirl." Amelia was eating it up. She posed, pouted, and blew kisses, her body glittering like a human disco ball. The borrowed diamonds around her neck, the same ones Ilara's team had flagged, flashed white and hot under the lights. Richard beamed, his chest puffed out. He loved it. He loved the attention, the envy, the sheer audacity of it. He was the man who had everything, and he wasn't afraid to flaunt it. A reporter from Access Hollywood shoved a microphone in his face. "Richard, you're the man of the hour. But we've got to ask, where is your wife, Ilara?" Richard's smile tightened, just a fraction. He leaned into the mic, adopting a tone of magnanimous, husbandly concern. "Ilara, unfortunately, isn't feeling her best tonight. She sends her regrets. She prefers, well, you know Ilara. She's a very private person. She finds all this a bit much." Amelia let out a tiny, sympathetic "aw" and patted his chest. The implication was clear. The mousy wife was at home, probably in her beige cardigan, while the real woman stood by his side. Inside, the party was in full swing. Champagne flowed, an orchestra played. Richard and Amelia made their grand entrance down the staircase, drawing gasps and whispers. The older trustees of the museum looked horrified. The younger tech bros looked impressed. At 8:00 p.m., Richard took the stage to a thunderous round of applause. The spotlight hit him. Thank you," he boomed. "Welcome all of you to my vision. The Grayson Foundation is more than just a name. It's a promise that we, the new leaders of the world, will shape the future. When I started Grayson Capital," he launched into his speech, a long, self-congratulatory monologue about his brilliance, his foresight, and his generosity. Amelia watched him from the front table, her face a mask of pure adoration, filming him for her Instagram story. At 8:01 p.m., in every newsroom in the city, an embargo lifted. The Wall Street Journal's front-page story went live. Grayson's empire, billionaire Richard Grayson, accused of massive embezzlement from OWN Foundation. At 8:05 p.m., as Richard was pontificating about fiscal responsibility, the personal phones of every CEO, investor, and board member in that room began to buzz, vibrate, and ping. One by one, faces began to drop. People looked up from their screens, their eyes wide with shock, and stared at the man on the stage. Richard, blinded by the spotlight, didn't notice. "And that is why I am proud to pledge another $50 million tonight." The applause was scattered, terrified. People were whispering, huddling together, showing each other their phones. The orchestra, sensing the shift in the room, began to play uneasily. Richard frowned, confused by the suddenly cold reception. "Thank you," he said, stepping down, his confidence wavering. "Richard," his PR agent, a woman pale with panic, whispered, running up to him. "Richard, you need to see this. The Journal. What? What is it?" he snapped. But before she could answer, a new commotion began. It started at the entrance to the museum, a sound from the red carpet outside. The sound of shouting, not the excited shouts for a celebrity, but the frantic, hungry yells of a press pack that has scented blood. The paparazzi that had been packing up were suddenly swarming back to the barricades. "What's going on?" Amelia demanded, annoyed that the attention was no longer on her. "Did Beyoncé arrive?" The massive doors to the great hall, which had been closed after the guests were seated, swung open. And in the doorway, framed by the light of the hall, stood Elara. Silence. It was not a gradual hush. It was a sudden, violent vacuum of sound, as if all the air had been sucked out of the Temple of Denda. The orchestra's music died with a discordant scrape of violins. Richard Grayson, who had been looking at his publicist's trembling hands, looked up, and he froze. His skin went from flushed to ashen in less than a second. The champagne glass in his hand, which he had just picked up, didn't slip. It shattered. The sound of the glass hitting the marble floor was like a gunshot in the silent room. It wasn't Elara. It was a vision. It was a queen. The woman in the doorway was not the beige ghost. She was a celestial event. The Valerius gown, that impossible shade of sapphire blue, seemed to emanate its own light. It was structured like a piece of divine armor, its lines clean, powerful, and utterly uncompromising. And around her neck, blazing with a cold, blue-white fire that eclipsed every other jewel in the room, was the Hayes star. It lay against her collarbone like a royal seal, a declaration of a power so profound and ancient. It made Richard's new money flashiness look like children's dress-up. She was not alone. Flanking her were not a fawning entourage, but two severe-looking men in dark, impeccably tailored suits. One was Marcus Thorne. The other, Richard recognized with a jolt of pure, icy terror, was Sterling Vance, the most feared federal prosecutor from the Southern District of New York. And behind them, the cameras flashed. But these were not the Access Hollywood paparazzi. These were the working press, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Bloomberg, and leading them, a Vogue team, but not for the society pages. This was their news division, led by a formidable editor who looked ready to document a public execution. Elara Hayes took one step into the room. Richard couldn't breathe. He was frozen. This wasn't just a new look. This wasn't a revenge dress. This was a coup d'etat. The woman he had dismissed as a librarian, as a beige shroud, was wearing a gown that probably cost more than his Bugatti, and a necklace that was, quite literally, priceless. But more than that, she was wearing an expression of absolute Arctic control. Amelia, beside him, was the first to speak, her voice a shrill, confused screech. What is that? What is she wearing? Who is that?" She genuinely, for a second, didn't recognize her. Elara began to walk. Her footsteps were silent, but they echoed in the cavernous room. She did not look at Richard. She did not look at Amelia. Her gaze was fixed on the museum's director and the elderly, powerful chairmen of the board, who were sitting at the head table, their faces masks of stunned comprehension. "Mr. Grayson!" The shout came from the WSJ reporter, who had pushed his way into the room. The cameras were rolling, the flashes erupting. "Mr. Grayson, can you comment on the SEC filing alleging you've embezzled over $90 million from the Foundation's endowment?" Richard's blood turned to ice. "SEC? Embezzled? Mr. Grayson," another reporter shouted, "is it true your primary credit line at Morgan Stanley was just frozen? Is Grayson Capital insolvent?" Richard staggered back, as if physically struck. He looked at Elara. She was halfway across the room now, moving with the unhurried grace of a panther. "Elara," he choked out. "Elara, what is this? What have you done?" She finally paused. She turned her head and looked at him. For the first time all night, she looked directly at her husband. There was no anger in her eyes. There was no pain. There was nothing. It was the detached pity one would give a fly trapped in amber. "Done, Richard?" she asked, her voice, though quiet, amplified by the stunned silence. "I haven't done anything. I'm simply correcting a clerical error. You see, you've been spending my money, and I'm here to collect." The freeze that held Richard Grayson was not just shock. It was the catastrophic, system-wide failure of a man who realized in one blinding instant that he was not the predator, but the prey. He had been played. For years he had been played. His entire life, his $14 billion valuation, his reputation, his place in this very room. It was all a performance, and the woman he thought was the stage manager was, in fact, the owner of the theater, the play, and the lights. And she had just pulled the plug. "Elara, no, you can't," he stammered, his mind racing, trying to find a move, an angle. "The board, our assets, they're locked. They're mine." "Were yours, Richard," Marcus Thorne said, stepping forward. He handed a single, leather-bound folder, not to Richard, but to the museum's stunned chairman. "The board of the Grayson Foundation has been provided with a 300-page forensic audit. Mr. Grayson has been funding his high-risk ventures and lifestyle by illegally leveraging the Foundation's core assets, assets which, as per the original 1940 Hayes Family Trust, are non-negotiable and cannot be used as collateral." You bitch," Richard whispered, his face crumbling. "You set me up." "You set yourself up, Richard," Elara said coolly. She had now reached the head table. "You just got sloppy. You assumed I was too stupid or too placid or too beige to notice." She then turned her attention, and the attention of the entire room, to the woman still clinging to Richard's arm. Amelia was shaking. The Vogue camera was no longer pointed at Elara's dress, but at Amelia's face. "Miss Vance?" Elara said, her voice dropping into that same dangerously polite tone she had used at Balthazar. "That's a remarkable necklace you're wearing." Amelia's hand instinctively went to the Graf diamond serpent. It was a gift," she stammered. "Yes, it was," Elara said. "A gift purchased on September 14th from a shell corporation, Vance Holdings LLC, which was funded directly from an account meant for the Foundation's pediatric cancer wing." The gasp in the room was sharp and collective. Amelia went white. "And the gown," Elara continued, gesturing to the nearly nude creation. "Stunning. Also purchased by the same shell company, the condo in Miami, the McLaren, all of it." The prosecutor, Sterling Vance, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice booming with authority, "you are in possession of stolen assets, assets procured with laundered, embezzled funds. You will be required to come with us to answer some questions." Two uniformed NYPD officers, who had entered silently behind the press, began to move toward her. Amelia shrieked. It was a high, terrified sound, like a rabbit caught in a trap. "No, Richie! Tell them! Tell them it's not true! Richie!" She grabbed Richard's arm, but he was a statue. He was broken. He didn't even look at her. He was staring at the exit, his empire, his life, dissolving in the flash of 1,000 cameras. Get off me!" he finally roared, shoving her away. He turned on Ilara, his face a mask of purple rage. "You did this! You!" He lunged at her. He never made it. The two dark-suited men who had flanked Ilara, not lawyers but her private security detail from the Hayes office, moved with liquid speed. They intercepted Richard before he was within 5 feet of her, subduing him and pinning his arms behind his back in one brutal, efficient motion. "Richard Grayson," Sterling Vance said, "you are being detained on suspicion of wire fraud, mail fraud, and embezzlement." The cameras went insane. The flashes were a solid wall of white light. Richard Grayson, the billionaire king of New York, was being held, struggling and pathetic, in his own tuxedo, at his own gala. Amelia Vance was sobbing, her makeup running in black rivers down her face. "I didn't know," she wailed, as the officers took her arm. "I didn't know. He just gave them to me." Her dress, which was meant to be the pinnacle of sex and power, now just looked cheap and tragic. It was the uniform of a thief. As Richard was escorted out, a broken, screaming shell of a man, his eyes met Ilara's one last time. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply watched him go. She watched the man who had laughed at her, dismissed her, and stolen from her, be dragged from her party, in her museum, his life in ruins. And then she turned back to the room. The silence that followed the removal of Richard and Amelia was not just an absence of sound. It was a physical weight. It was the sound of $1 billion empire, a social hierarchy, and 2 human lives imploding in real time. The remaining 400 guests, the power brokers of finance, media, art, and politics, were frozen. Some were staring at the great doors through which the screaming, sobbing Amelia and the stunned, roaring Richard had been dragged. Others were staring at Ilara. Phones, which had been buzzing with the Wall Street Journal alert, were now clutched in white-knuckled hands. The younger tech titans who had worshipped Richard's aggressive, disruptor ethos looked pale. If Richard Grayson's $14 billion valuation could evaporate in 10 minutes, what did that say about their own? The investors who had stakes in Grayson Capital were whispering frantically to their wives, their faces ashen. And then there were the matriarchs, the old money grande dames of the Upper East Side, women with names like Rockefeller, Astor, and Vanderbilt, who had been forced to tolerate Richard for a decade. They were not whispering. They were watching Ilara with a look of profound, cold, and terrible satisfaction. They were smiling. Ilara Hayes stood at the center of the room, a pillar of sapphire and diamonds. She was, in every sense of the word, in complete control. She did not rush to the podium. She did not look flustered. She turned, her movements as deliberate and unhurried as a queen in her own court, and began to walk toward the stage. The only sound in the Temple of Dendur was the near-silent tap-tap-tap of her custom-made satin heels on the marble floor. As she reached the small staircase to the dais, she paused. There, gleaming on the floor, were the glittering shards of the champagne glass Richard had shattered. She looked down at the broken glass for a single, long second. Then, with the grace of a dancer, she lifted the hem of her Valerius gown just enough to step over the mess, not through it. She ascended the stage. The metaphor was lost on no one. She picked up the microphone from the podium where Richard had, minutes before, delivered his triumphant, fraudulent speech. She held it, not with a nervous grip, but with a light, easy confidence. "My apologies," she said. Her voice was amplified, clear as a bell and utterly calm. It didn't tremble, it didn't crack. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a board meeting. "My apologies for that. Unpleasantness. It appears we had a significant breach this evening, not of security, but of ethics and of trust." A man at a front table, a hedge fund manager named Bill Chen, who was a major investor in Grayson Capital, stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. "Elara, Miss Hayes, what in God's name is going on? What does this mean for Grayson Capital? We have holdings. My fund has $1 billion with him." The room tensed. This was the real question. The social drama was theatre. This was money. Elara turned her calm, Arctic gaze to him. She did not look surprised by the question. She had anticipated it. "Mr. Chen," she said, addressing him directly, "thank you for your question. Grayson Capital, as an entity, was, I'm afraid, a fiction. It was a house of cards built on a single stolen asset, the principal endowment of the Hayes Family Trust, which I, as its sole trustee, placed in the care of the Grayson Foundation." She let that sink in. The blood drained from Bill Chen's face. "Mr. Grayson," she continued, "used that principal, illegally, to leverage his personal funds, creating a valuation that was pure fantasy. He was not a billionaire, Mr. Chen. He was simply a man with a very, very large and very illegal line of credit. My credit." As of 8:15 p.m., Elara announced, "A court-appointed receiver has taken control of the Grayson Capital offices. A federal injunction has frozen every account tied to Mr. Grayson's name. I am afraid, Mr. Chen, that Grayson Capital no longer exists." A collective, horrified gasp sucked the air from the room. It wasn't just an arrest. It was an annihilation. It was the public execution of an entire company. Bill Chen collapsed back into his seat, as if his legs had been cut out from under him. Elara turned back to the room at large, her voice softening just a fraction, taking on the tone of a leader reassuring her people after a coup. "The Grayson Foundation is therefore also a compromised entity," she said. "But the work we do, the work I have always intended, will not be. Effective as of this moment, the Foundation will be undergoing a complete restructuring. It will be returning to its original charter, under its original name, the Hayes Family Endowment for the Arts and Sciences." She looked at the museum's director, Mr. Hoving, who was standing by his table, looking as though he might have a heart attack. "Mr. Hoving," she said, a small, reassuring smile touching her lips, "please be assured that the $50 million pledge Mr. Grayson made this evening is secure." Hoving let out a massive, audible sigh of relief. "In fact," Elara continued, "now that the Foundation's accounts are no longer being compromised by Mr. Grayson's unfortunate lifestyle choices, I am pleased to announce we will be doubling that pledge to $100 million, effective immediately." This time the sound was a roar. It was stunned. It was grateful, it was worshipful. It was the sound of 400 of the most powerful people in the world realizing they were not on a sinking ship, but that the captain they thought was in charge had been a pirate, and the quiet, beige wife they'd all ignored was, in fact, the admiral of the entire fleet. The applause was thunderous, a wave of pure, unadulterated relief. Elara waited for it to die down, her expression one of polite, serene command. "My family," she said, her voice dropping into a more personal, powerful register, "has quietly supported this city, this museum and the arts for over a century. We have always preferred to do so without fanfare. We believed that true philanthropy was anonymous, that the work was more important than the name attached to it. Tonight, fanfare became necessary. She looked directly into the lens of the Vogue camera, which was still rolling, capturing the most incredible society story of the decade. For 10 years, I allowed my family's name to be obscured by another. I did this in the name of partnership. But partnership requires trust, and trust, like an endowment, is a sacred principle. Once you break it, the interest is gone, and the capital is forfeit. Mr. Grayson mistook discretion for disinterest. He mistook tradition for weakness. He saw beige and assumed it was empty. He forgot, she said, a flicker of a smile playing on her lips, that the oldest, most valuable parchments in the world are beige. He forgot that the very foundations of this great museum are beige stone. He forgot that substance endures. She looked out at the room. Tonight is not an end. It is a restoration. The Hayes Endowment is back. Integrity is not a quiet suggestion. It is a requirement. Substance will always outlast spectacle. She paused, and her eyes, for just a microsecond, flickered toward the door where Amelia had been dragged out. And true class is never for sale. It is earned, and, as you have seen tonight, it is defended. She placed the microphone back on the podium. Now, she said, her voice returning to that of a gracious hostess. I believe we were promised dessert. The orchestra, please resume. The bar is open. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, the orchestra conductor, looking utterly bewildered but obeying the command, picked up his baton. Hesitantly, a Vivaldi piece began to swell, filling the void. Slowly, then all at once, the room came back to life. But it was a different room. Waiters who had been hiding in the wings rushed out with decadent desserts. The murmur of conversation began, electric and hushed. The party had fractured. The new money crowd, Richard's crowd, was huddled near the exits, on their phones, their faces sick. The real power, however, gravitated toward Ilara. A circle of women, the city's steely matriarchs, approached her as she stepped down from the stage. Beatrice Astor Lennox, a woman in her 80s who ruled the city's charity boards, took Ilara's hands. "Ilara, my dear," Beatrice said, her voice like dry ice. "You have done what we all wished we could. You took out the trash. And you did it without spilling a single drop on the carpet. Your grandmother would have simply loved it." "We were so worried about you, darling," murmured another, Nan Vanderbilt. "That creature he brought to Balthazar, in a red dress, before 5 Oiac. It was an abomination. We are so pleased to have you back." They didn't just congratulate her. They welcomed her. They were closing ranks. The beige ghost was gone. In her place was Ilara Hayes, the new, undisputed queen of their set, the one who had finally, and publicly, put the vulgar usurpers in their place. While Ilara graciously accepted their fealty, Marcus Thorne and her analyst Sarah moved silently through the room. They weren't partying. They were distributing small embossed cards to the stunned, and now deeply relieved, board members of the foundation. The cards read, "Emergency Meeting. 8 a.m., Hayes Tower, 54th floor." The cleanup was already in motion. Finally, the formidable editor of Vogue, a woman whose severe bob and dark glasses were a global trademark, cut through the crowd. She didn't fawn. She approached Ilara as an equal. "Ilara." Her voice was crisp. "That was a moment that will be spoken of for a generation. We are, of course, scrapping the gala's best-dressed piece. "This is the cover. The news cover." "Isabella," Ilara replied, inclining her head. "I'm glad you are here to see it. It's important the truth is well documented." "The dress," Isabella said, her eyes clinically appraising the sapphire gown. "It's a Valerius. He hasn't made a gown in a decade. How?" "Valerius is my godfather," Ilara said simply. "He designed this for my 30th birthday, 10 years ago. He sent it with a note, which said, 'You will know when it is time to wear it.'" "This morning," Ilara said. "I knew." Isabella's eyebrows shot up over her glasses. This wasn't a last-minute revenge dress. This was a decade of patience. This was a long, cold, calculated game. "And the Hayes star," Isabella stated. "It hasn't been seen since the coronation of King George VI." "It felt appropriate," Ilara said, touching the massive blue diamond. "A night of a certain kind of coronation, don't you think? A restoration of the proper order of things." Isabella nodded, a small, sharp smile on her face. She understood completely. "And Miss Vance's display?" "Some people wear clothes to get attention," Ilara said, her voice devoid of malice, a simple statement of fact. "Some people wear clothes to command it, and some people, like Miss Vance, simply wear their price tag. It's unfortunate she didn't realize hers was paid for by stealing from a children's cancer fund. It makes for a very tacky and very temporary accessory." With that, Ilara gave Isabella a polite nod. She had done what she came to do. She did not stay to soak in the praise. She did not linger for more champagne. The room was hers. The city was hers. She had made her statement. To the bewilderment of the guests, less than 30 minutes after Richard had been arrested, Ilara Hayes handed her empty water glass to a waiter, gave a final, gracious nod to Mr. Hoving, and walked. She walked alone, back through the center of the room, her sapphire gown parting the crowds like the Red Sea. The cameras, which had been put away, scrambled to capture her exit. She did not look at them. She walked out of the great hall, under the archway, and out into the cool New York night. Her discreet black Audi A8 was waiting. Not the Bugatti. Not the Rolls. She slipped into the back seat. Marcus Thorne was waiting for her in the passenger seat. "Well done, Ilara," he said. Ilara leaned her head back against the leather. The Hayes star was cold against her skin. "Is the 8 a.m. meeting confirmed?" she asked. "Everyone will be there," Marcus replied. "Good." The car pulled silently away from the curb, leaving the pandemonium of the Met, the flashing lights, and the ruins of Richard Grayson's life behind. "Get me a coffee, would you, Marcus? It's going to be a very long night. We have an endowment to rebuild." The beige ghost was gone. The Queen was on the throne, and the work had already begun. The fallout was immediate and total. By 9:15 a.m. the next morning, Ilara Hayes was the #1 trending topic in the world. The Wall Street Journal story had been corroborated by the public arrests. Grayson Capital, built on a foundation of lies and leveraged credit, collapsed on itself. It was delisted from the stock exchange by noon. Richard Grayson, facing federal charges, was a billionaire only on paper. In reality, he was bankrupt. The $14 billion had been a mirage. Amelia Vance was released after questioning, but her career was over. The brands that had flocked to her dropped her in hours. Her Instagram was a toxic wasteland of snake emojis and comments accusing her of stealing from sick children. She had been forced to surrender the dress, the necklace, the car, and the condo. The gifts were all evidence. She was last seen at LAX, flying coach back to her small hometown, a pariah. The dress she was mocked for, the tacky, stolen, sheer gown, was now her legacy. And Ilara? Elara Hayes was on the cover of Forbes. Not on the billionaire wives list, but on the main cover. Elara Hayes, the quiet hand that built and burned an empire. The beige cardigans and sensible loafers were gone for the most part. They had been her camouflage, her invisibility cloak, while she gathered her data and waited for the perfect moment to strike. While Richard and Amelia saw a mousy, irrelevant wife, she had been a general in a war room, calmly moving her pieces into place. 6 months later, the penthouse, which of course had been in the Hayes family trust all along, had been redecorated. The sterile, cold chrome Richard had loved was gone, replaced with warm, priceless art and comfortable, elegant furniture. Elara was in her new home office, a vast, light-filled room overlooking the park. She was no longer just the head of the endowment. She had taken her rightful place as the CEO of Hayes Consolidated, the multi-generational family firm she had been groomed to run since childhood. Marcus Thorne entered, placing a small stack of files on her antique desk. She was wearing a sharp, navy blue Victoria Beckham dress. She looked up and smiled. "Marcus, good news, I hope." "The U.S. Attorney's Office is offering Richard a plea deal," he said. 25 years, reduced to 10 with good behavior, if he cooperates fully in retrieving the offshore assets. "He'll take it," Elara said, not looking up from the report she was signing. "He's a coward. He's terrified of a trial. And Ms. Vance?" "Agreed to testify against him in exchange for immunity. A wise move. She's writing a tell-all memoir. Bling and Betrayal, I believe." Elara laughed. A real, genuine laugh. Good for her. At least she finally found a way to earn her own money. Marcus handed her the final file. "And this, the divorce decree. Finalized this morning. You are officially Elara Hayes again, in all respects." Elara took the pen. She looked at the paper that officially severed her from the man who had so badly underestimated her. She thought of the luncheon at Balthazar, the cheap laugh, the cruel dismissal of her beige clothes. She signed her name, Elara M. Hayes, with a firm, decisive stroke. She closed the folder and pushed it aside. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her voice bright. "Now, let's get to the new acquisitions. I'm thinking of moving the firm into biotech. I've just read a very interesting paper." She was done looking back. The ghost was gone. The Queen was on the throne, and the future was hers to build. Elara Hayes's story isn't just about a revenge dress. It's about the lethal power of being underestimated. Richard and Amelia laughed at her clothes because it was the only part of her they could see. They never bothered to look deeper. They mistook her silence for weakness, her patience for stupidity, and her kindness for a blank check. They forgot that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one who doesn't need to shout. Elara played the long game. She wore her beige cardigan like armor, hiding the Queen underneath until the perfect moment to checkmate. What did you think of Elara's ultimate power move? Have you ever seen someone so thoroughly misjudged? Let us know in the comments below. And if you love stories about justice, power, and getting the last laugh, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe and ring that bell. You won't want to miss the next story we have in store. Thanks for watching.